Okay, so welcome to the Do-It-Yourself Mentor Branding. This is the training on brainstorming and outlining. And you're probably going to hear me typing on the keyboard in this training, so just be prepared for that because I want to kind of go through this as I do it. So if you'll see here, like you don't even need a template for brainstorming. I just wrote this up as a more organized way to approach it. But as you'll see in the video with the client that's up, we just have a blank document, and he thinks, and I do the writing for him as his consultant on the project. So yeah, so I'm just going to throw that on there as well, real quick, and away we go. So if we look at the concept, or maybe even this will just be like the title of the book can sometimes encompass this. The title, we will rework. If you do decide to work with us, we will work with you on that. We'll also do a short piece and training video on creating titles and copywriting and all of that. But I'm not going to go into that right now. So for right now, I'm just going to call it setting. So that's more the concept. I'm going to be writing a book on setting. For those who aren't familiar, I am an author, and I do a podcast that's on writing craft, which is why I'm going this way as opposed to a mentoring book here. So let's say I want to write a book on setting, and so maybe I call it a more interesting setting, or maybe just better settings in novels, something to that effect. Okay. Now, an overall narrative approach is a more complex way to approach nonfiction. And so these are stories where there's a story that goes from the beginning to the end. We will have a separate template and a separate training on how to write that kind of book. I will tell you right now that it is more complex. There are more revisions because there's more moving parts into it, as opposed to you can maybe take one story and break it down into several parts and tell it throughout the book, which isn't an overall narrative approach. Rather, it is a spanned story, which can be fairly easy to do. So maybe we'll talk about a spanned story here, which doesn't really fit with what I'm writing. So maybe I'll change this, and we'll do habits. Simple one. Better habits, faster habits. So just to kick this off, and so the overall narrative, maybe we'll start with I moved to a new city, got a new job, and all my routines were ruined. All my routines and habits of my old life were broken. And so maybe I go into the fact that quickly I started to make develop bad habits. With all the old ones having been broken with this new city and the new job. So maybe some illustrative examples would be like every night when I got home, it was a long commute, and I was starving. And so instead of cooking something healthy, I would pick up fast food. Right? And so, here's an illustrative example, just a story here. Maybe some of the principles I want to talk about is rewards, and break that down into motivating beginnings, and rewarding positive behavior. Right? And so these are some of the principles I'll talk about, rewards. And so these could either be their own chapters here, or maybe I'll just cover them all in one chapter, and those will be subsections. We'll see. So steps, this doesn't necessarily need to be something, like I said, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll just write anything that comes to your mind. What else do I know about habits? And then I'll talk about systems, and I'll talk about re-evaluations, and what else do I know about habits? Talk about replacement behaviors, and we'll talk about when to evaluate. That's a good one. Evaluate. So at this point, I'm not even really looking at the headings that I've got set up here. I'm just writing as stuff comes to my mind. What are some other stories? Swedish fish and getting into treats. For those of you who are not familiar, I have a huge sweet tooth, and candy is a big motivator for me. But at the same time, as a powerful motivator for developing my habits, I also have a hard time not getting into it when I have it. So there's a story here I can talk about how I've managed that issue. Let's see, Brady's post-workout donut. So again, you just kind of sit down and you just crank ideas here. And once you have enough of this, and like I said, you usually want to spend a good hour on this or two to make sure you really flesh it out. And then, as I've mentioned before, you kind of want to then go down and take a day on it. So if you have access to the templates on the website, you'll see this here. And so this is what's called the general outline. And as you'll notice, there's not a piece here for an introduction. Same thing with the conclusion. Those are covered in an in-depth. And so this template is divided into two parts. And so this is designed so you can just kind of take this and copy paste it over here to whatever document you're working on. And these are set up as short examples, and these are a little more in-depth. And the more in-depth has an explanation that goes with it so that it's really clear what idea we're talking about here. And then the short one is just, there's a really brief example to kind of talk about what we're looking at. So what we want to do is once we have a little bit, once we have all the brainstorm out, we need to start forming these into chapters. And so let's take this, I'm going to go ahead and bold that and convert it into heading 3 here. And so this will be a chapter. Rewards chapter, motivating beginnings. So now that I have my chapter and principle, let's go ahead and write that in there, rewards. Okay. So the first thing in a chapter is, oh, doggone it, this is the wrong file. Okay, so I'll fill this out here in front of you. Yeah, so in rewards, we need a chapter introduction, right? And a chapter introduction tells people what you're going to tell them. Okay, so I see what I did wrong here. So here we talk about the numerology for those who are into that, and this is the outline. So let's go ahead and copy paste that in instead. So Control V. So, all right, so here it talks about an introduction and what you need to be doing there. And so we need a hook initially. But like I said, as we look at this, we just kind of want to start converting it as is, bolding and pulling out things. So this is going to be a chapter as well. I'm going to go ahead and heading 3 that. I'm going to be bolding these as well, just so they really pop for me. Re-evaluations, definitely going to be a chapter on its own. Go ahead and bold that. Replacement behaviors. When to evaluate. When to evaluate is going to be a smaller piece here, because that'll be part of re-evaluations, or I could even just call that evaluations, tighten it up a little bit. So So yeah, so then we want to look at the principles within it. And so as I have outlined here, we talk about short theory, anecdote, proof, evidence, long theory, testimonials, exercise, and implementation plan, and common struggles. Now, you don't need all of these components, but it will help you kind of fill it out. So if we look at it, the first thing we want is short theory, or we would even call this an introduction. And so this is basically talking about what it is. So introduction / short theory. So what is the theory on rewards? And that is that, rewarded behavior is repeated. That's the basic theory. And what I need to write here, now understand that the outline is what you will have in front of you when you speak your book. So you need to write a big enough section here so that it will bring to mind all that you want to share. Sometimes that might just be one word or two words. It could be, story of the red shirt. And that's enough that I might be able to recall that story. Whereas I may have to write a paragraph to get me started. Just whatever you need to be able to fill that out as you go through this outline. Rewarded behavior is repeated. And so I'm going to leave that as my open here. So then we can go back to the template. And so with the template here, you can actually just delete and plug. I'm kind of going back and forth here just because I wanted to kind of show you building out from the brainstorm. And so you can even post introduction, you can have a hook, right? We could talk about Coca-Cola is one of the biggest companies in the world. And part of the reason is that when they first made their soda, it had cocaine in it, right? And that instant reward when people were drinking this soda set the stage for this company to become this giant, right? Eventually, they did take the cocaine out, but that was their springboard. They had a product that was addictive, and all rewarded behavior is addictive. That's just a fundamental point. And just saying that feels like a good idea to me. And that is, all rewarded behavior is repeated if the reward is sufficient for the cost, right? So maybe that's my hook and intro. Coca-Cola and cocaine, all rewarded behavior is repeated if the reward is big enough. So, right, so that kind of expands me there. Then I've got kind of short theory, right, which that has actually kind of bled into it. You can kind of see those ideas rolling together there. Motivating beginnings. I can talk about Swedish Fish here. As you can see, I'm pulling that from one of my stories, right? And reward positive behavior. And so upon completion, you need a reward, right? So yeah, just kind of outlining the chapter there. I can look back at the stories. We can even talk about, I can put in Brady's Donut here, assuming I don't want to tell that story somewhere else. And so initially, as I write this outline, what I'll do is I'll just plug in any story that fits a chapter. And then once I have the whole outline filled out, I'll go back and say, this story, I've mentioned it 3 times, but it's best told in another chapter, right? So maybe I move it down here, Brady's Donut, right? Just to make sure that I'm not repeating the same stories over and over and over as I go through this. So then we can look at the other points of the chapter. So the anecdote is the story, which I've plugged in here, and so you can set up an anecdote a few ways. So an anecdote can be long form, where you're not going to. So and even then, I would maybe I'll call it chapter long form. chapter long form, and as I mentioned before, you've got the whole book long form. So in a chapter long, I'm going to tell part of it here. And then I will reflect. And that reflection becomes the principles, right? So this will probably go after this part here. Let's move that down here, and so we have the introduction, the short theory. We have our hook, our introduction, short theory, so people know what this chapter is about. Then we have a long form anecdote here. So I tell part of my story here, and then we have the reflective moment, right, where I go back and I think about what this means. And that should develop into this principle right here. So, right, and then that flows into this, and within that I can share this short story here. And then what should happen if you're doing the long form anecdote, you should come back. So we tell the next part of the story, and then we reflect on its meaning, and that leads us into the next part of the principle that we're teaching. So that is a chapter long anecdote method there, telling a story that can span this. And you'll see this if you watch the video as Brady is building out his book. He talks about certain stories with his ex-wife that take a whole chapter, and he comes back to them in different points and things that have happened within that. So this is taking that brainstorm, we start plugging it in, and then once we start, then we can kind of pull from the different pieces we've set up here, and then fill in the blanks as we go. So another thing we can do, and so this would be done in individual principles here, because we're doing a long form anecdote. I would then add in maybe some scientific studies or evidence. So we've got stories backing it up. We've got personal reflection. Now we've got some science backing up the principle to really strengthen it for the audience. So because I have a personal story here, I probably wouldn't add in another testimonial. But if I pull out this story, or maybe move it to another section, I could add in a testimonial. And what I would want to do is maybe, and usually these will come towards the end of a chapter, but you want to, again, you identify a difficulty that people have, right? So, and then the story, that is the testimonial of overcoming that specific difficulty as it relates to that principle or that part of the principle. And so, as I've mentioned, that's what when I say testimonial, that's what I mean as in different than a review. This is a specific story about a specific challenge or concern that someone has, and then how that is overcome. And then if we scroll down here, the next part is then exercise and implementation. So for the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and pull out this. And so then we want to talk about exercise and implementation. So this can be a challenge you have for the reader. So you'd say, go and try this. Go try ... Or you can say, what I did. So you're showing your own implementation of the principle there in the same way. And so it's just to make sure that they can connect these ideas and these stories to its practical application. Right. And so that then is the chapter. And then if you're doing a long form narrative that's either the whole book or the chapter, you then close out the story. Or if you're doing a story that spans the whole book, or you move into the cliffhanger, right, that would then pull them into the next chapter. So depending on what kind of storytelling you're doing there. So if it's just nonfiction, and you're telling just short little piece stories throughout it, then you'll close here with the implementation and the challenge, right? Or it's referred to as a call to action a lot. So just a few different ways that you can approach the end of the chapter there. And we will set up templates for each different approach that you want to use. So if you're saying, I want to do long chapter form stories, or I want to do a long form narrative of the whole book, or I just want to do principles with short little explanation stories and illustrations that aren't spanning whole chapters, but just individual principles and ideas within that. So we will set up different templates for that, so you have an idea. So then I want to go back, and so this is how I flush out the chapter, and you'll just do this for each chapter as you flush it out. Introductions and conclusions are going to be a little bit different, and so that's why they have a different base here. So the hook here is essential. If you're in chapter 2 of the book, the hook is less essential to get people's attention, because they've kind of already decided they want to read this in chapter 1. But in chapter 1, this is paramount, right? You've got to, I don't want to delete that. Oh, wait, no, this is the brainstorming. Right, so we need something to get their attention, right? And so maybe I'm like, you either want to focus on the pain point, what it is they're struggling with, that you can help them with, or you want to just have something very interesting, right? So let's see if we can come up with a good hook for my habit book. And maybe I've got a story of a bodybuilder, and I can say, Eric Jensen struggled going to the gym for 20 years, and then in 6 months he lost 80 pounds in fat and gained 30 in muscle. And he said it was the easiest gym routine he'd ever done. Because going to the gym was no longer a goal. It was a habit, right? So it's kind of, just talking about this, I'm just making this up right here as kind of a hook for the opening of the book, right? But it focuses on the pain point, something people struggle going to the gym, and then tells this brief little story about this guy who, it was no longer a goal of his to go to the gym. It was just habit. It was just something he did, and that's what made it easy. And so in it, there's a brief illustration of the power of habits there. So the introduction, this is the book introduction as opposed to the chapter. So here you're going to talk about who you are, why you matter, which is why they should listen to you, why you should read their book. So this is from Mr. Mitchell. He said, I'm a man that lived without intention, and my results show that when I saw how incredible the results I created of the things I had not wanted, I decided what results I could get if I put intention on the things I wanted to have in my life. So as an editor, I would go back and I would work with them, and I think we did that already. But he just kind of was telling his own story. He had lived just kind of day to day, just going with the flow. And that had not taken him somewhere he wanted to be. So that's what he's expressing here. So we want to talk about what you're going to learn in this book. In my book, it's like I'm going to teach you how to form habits and how to create them in a way that they're hard to break. And teach you how to evaluate them effectively to decide if that habit is working and to look at why they're not. Like sometimes you'll set up a program that you have a habit, there's a motivator, there's a reward, and yet it's not syncing. And so, we'll talk about evaluation techniques on how to do it. This is not a real book. I'm just spinning stuff here. Then you want to tell them what they will get, learn, or change by the end. Promise them if they read and apply these things, these are the changes they will have in their life, because that's why they're reading your book. They want change in their life. So you need to tell them that's what they're going to get. And so that's the outline for the intro. We covered the chapters, and then in the conclusion, again, you need to be offering that hope, right? You want to finish your overall story if that's what you're doing. You want to tie up any loose ends. You want to point out how it has changed people's lives. You want to paraphrase your own transformation from applying these things, and then you want to promise them transformation again. And so it is all about that offering of hope to them and creating that illustrative hope through your own life and the lives of others who've tried these principles and had them work for them. So that is the brainstorm into outline method. So as I've mentioned before, you're going to want to sit on this a day or two to plug in more ideas. And then you need to sit down and just speak out the book. It's not going to be beautiful when it comes out, even though some of these transcriptions used do a rough job. We can see that here in this quote from this book. It's a little rough and hard to follow. And that's why we do revisions, and we will have a training up on self-editing and addressing. But I mean, a lot of this you could just see even without any training, be like, that does need to be cleared up. So we'll talk about approaching this in the self-editing video, and a lot of other things to look for there. But the first step is just start cranking out ideas, and then you're going to convert those into chapters. You're going to then fill out those chapters based on the template there. And as you can see, the template we have here is very illustrative, and it's examples kind of showing you what you want to do there. And so you can kind of plug it in and just make it work for you and get that book done. So if you have any questions or comments, or there's any confusion, you can go ahead and let us know. And if there's enough confusion on points in the video, we will refilm it and try to address those and clarify anything that's not clear here. So good luck getting that book done, and maybe I'll see you in the next video, or maybe I'll see you on the Amazon charts.